Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating journey into the past to see how the literal mountains, oceans, and daily lives of ancient Athenians actually gave birth to Western political philosophy. You know, it's so easy to picture philosophy as something created in a total vacuum, right? Just a bunch of guys in togas staring up at the sky. But the reality? The greatest ideas in human history are deeply, inextricably tied to the geography and the social structures from which they spring. So think about this profound paradox for a second. If Athens is universally celebrated as the glorious inventor of democracy, why did its absolute greatest minds, heavy hitters like Socrates and Plato, absolutely loathe it? It's a mystery that kind of contradicts everything we're taught in school. But stick with me, because once you understand the specific physical and social landscape of ancient Greece, this whole paradox is going to make perfect sense. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The Greek city-state context. 2. Social classes of Athens. 3. Socrates versus amateur rule. 4. Plato's structural reengineering. And 5. Aristotle's middle-class solution. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The Greek city-state context. Shaping the polis. Well, a really vital concept to grasp right off the bat is that people are, to a massive extent, products of their institutional environment. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, sure, they were geniuses, and they probably would have been geniuses anywhere. But what they actually chose to speak and write about, that was entirely shaped by the specific society they lived in. They were trying to solve the immediate problems right in their own backyard. And honestly, geography was the ultimate determining factor here. Look at how the mountains and the sea literally chopped Greece up into these narrow, isolated valleys. Communities essentially grew in their own little bubbles. And because resources in these valleys were so limited, the populations naturally stayed pretty small. I mean, Athens at its peak only had an estimated total population of maybe 200,000 to 400,000 people. That's basically the size of a modern mid-sized suburb. This created an incredibly intimate, personal city-state, or what they called a polis. Unlike the massive, anonymous countries we live in today, Athenian democracy was face-to-face. They had a profound spirit of equality and belonging, which made Athens the ancient world's ultimate laboratory for democratic experimentation. Section 2. Social classes of Athens, the reality of the polis. Now, here's where we hit a really hard, fascinating demographic reality. When we hear the word democracy, we instinctively think everybody gets a vote, right? Well, actually, scratch that. The politically active citizens, meaning males born to citizen parents, were a minority. They made up only about a third of the population. The whole society was essentially held up by a massive slave class, which was around 50% of the people, doing all the heavy lifting as miners, mariners, and civil servants. And the rest? They were methiques, which were resident foreigners who stimulated the economy and paid special taxes but couldn't even vote. So Athenian democracy was, in reality, a highly exclusive club propped up by the labor of non-citizens. And this unique social structure leads us to a pretty wild concept called scholae. It's the Greek word for leisure, or, wait for it, unemployment. Yes, in ancient Athens, having a day job or running a business was actually frowned upon. They thought of it as a negative because it meant an absence of leisure. And why was being unemployed the ultimate goal? Because being totally free from daily labor, again, thanks to the slaves and medics, gave citizens the literal free time they needed to run the government. It meant they could sit in the sovereign assembly 10 times a year and actually govern their city. Section 3. Socrates versus amateur rule. The gadfly's critique. So it's crucial to understand that Greek political theory wasn't born out of some deep admiration for their society. Far from it. These guys weren't writing fan mail to the government. Their theories were born out of a desperate need to fix the glaring flaws they saw all around them. They were basically arguing against the status quo, trying to find a fundamentally better way to organize human life. And the main thing they were arguing against was this Periclean principle of happy versatility. This was the very heartbeat of Athenian democracy, the belief that everyday, civic-minded amateurs should be the ones running the government. Since the citizens had all this scholae, or free time, the prevailing attitude was kind of like, hey, you're free on Tuesday, why not come down and help run the state, or sit on a jury? Socrates absolutely despised this idea. I mean, he hated it. He viewed politics as a highly specialized art form, and like any art, he believed it demands expert knowledge. For Socrates, letting a bunch of everyday amateurs run the government was as crazy as letting a random guy off the street perform open-heart surgery on you. Just as a doctor needs to know medicine, a statesman has to possess genuine knowledge of governance. He thought public opinion was completely incompetent. It all came down to his core belief: virtue is knowledge. In his mind, All wrongdoing is just ignorance. So logically, only those who truly, genuinely know what is good should be allowed to rule. Definitely not a random majority of amateurs. Section 4. Plato's Structural Reengineering, Fixing Athens. So what happens next is tragic. The Democratic Assembly of Athens ultimately tries and executes Socrates by making him drink hemlock. This event deeply, deeply traumatized his star pupil, Plato. It was literally the turning point of Plato's life. For him, this was undeniable proof that a democracy of amateurs could, and would, witlessly destroy the absolute best person in their society. Plato completely lost faith in the Athenian system. He decided it wasn't worthy of any respect, and he set out to design a flawless alternative in his masterpiece, the Republic. Plato decided to completely tear up the blueprint. He re-engineered the actual geographic and social realities of Athens into this idealized, super-rigid hierarchy based entirely on the human soul. He believed three forces drive us: reason, spirit, and appetite. So he looked at the real Athenian classes and just swapped them out. Instead of amateur citizens running things, he wanted a tiny elite class of philosopher kings driven pure reason. Instead of the medics handling trade, he imagined a class of soldier guardians driven by spirit to defend the state. And that massive slave class replaced by an artisan class driven by appetite, whose only job was to make stuff. For Plato, a just society simply meant everyone staying in their assigned lane and doing exactly what they were built for. But here's the wild part. Plato knew that even his brilliant philosopher kings could be corrupted by the petty arguments over wealth that constantly ruined Greek city-states. His solution? Communism, but strictly for the elite. Private property was completely abolished for the rulers and the military. He even wanted to eliminate traditional marriages and families. Literally, breeding would be regulated by the state. Why go to such extremes? To completely wipe out the distractions of family drama and property disputes. He wanted his rulers to be 100% obsessed with the welfare of the community, with zero selfish interests. Plato warned that without this insanely rigid structure, societies inevitably fall apart. He mapped out this grim cycle of degeneration. The ideal state first slips into a timocracy, ruled by the military. Then it devolves into an oligarchy, where the rich take over to feed their appetites. Eventually, the poor get fed up, they revolt, and you get a democracy. Now remember, Plato thought democracy was basically just anarchy disguised as freedom. And because democracies lack discipline, they always get hijacked by demagogues, which crashes the whole system into the final, darkest phase, tyranny. Section 5. Aristotle's middle-class solution, the best practicable state. Now, the shift between Plato and his student, Aristotle, is huge. Where Plato's reaction at Athens was extreme, uncompromising idealism, literally tossing out the rule of law for the absolute power of perfect philosopher kings, Aristotle was much more of a scientist. The guy actually studied 158 different constitutions. He was incredibly pragmatic. He knew perfect people just don't exist. So he heavily championed the rule of law, believing that laws hold the accumulated practical wisdom of generations. He wasn't looking for unattainable perfection. He just wanted the best practicable state for flawed humans. Aristotle really zeroed in on the geography and wealth distribution of the Greek city-states, and he concluded that the massive gap between the rich and the poor was the absolute root cause of all political instability. He noticed the super-rich have too many advantages, they refuse to follow rules, and only know how to boss people around. On the flip side, the extremely poor have nothing, they're envious, resentful, and they'll listen to any smooth-talking demagogue promising free stuff. When your society is just these two warring extremes, it's a recipe for disaster. You just get endless factionalism, fighting, and eventually tyranny. So Aristotle had this brilliant, incredibly modern insight. He realized that if you want to stop the endless cycle of revolutions in the polis, you have to distribute property somewhat equitably. You literally cannot have a healthy society if it's just an endless tug-of-war between the super-rich oligarchs and the totally impoverished masses. The tension will snap the whole system in half. His highly practical solution? A system he called the polity. It's a mixed constitution that relies entirely on a large, stable, middle class. Aristotle saw them as the perfect, logical center of power. They aren't so poor that they're desperate and jealous, and they aren't so incredibly rich that they're arrogant and detached. A massive middle class acts like a giant shock absorber. They are the essential buffer holding the extreme rich and the extreme poor in check, bringing a level of community spirit that actually allows the rule of law to survive and thrive. Which leaves us with a really powerful thought to end on. Aristotle figured out over 2,000 years ago that a strong middle class is the ultimate anchor against societal collapse. When we look at our own world right now, with shifting wealth distributions and growing social extremes, we have to ask ourselves, how stable are the social structures of our modern democracies? Have we learned the lessons hidden in the ancient Athenian landscape, or are we risking the exact same cycle of decay these great thinkers warned us about? Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.